Lighthouse Keeper's Son, an ode to the boy who cried wolf, by Aseop. The lighthouse had always stood like a solitary tooth in the black cliffs, white against the endless gray of sea and fog. Its lamp swung in slow, grinding circles, and the gears groaned like an old beast waking from slumber. Thomas, the lighthouse keeper's son, liked to climb the spiral stairs when the fog came rolling in, letting it curl around him like a living thing. He was 11, pale and wiry, with a mop of hair that always fell into his eyes, and an imagination too large for the little seaside village that clung to the cliffs like barnacles. Young enough to be a child, but old enough to be wiser than he chose to be. His father, the keeper, was a stern man with hands like carved driftwood and a voice as hollow and deep as the cliffs themselves. Since the sea had claimed his wife years ago, he had raised Thomas alone, tethering him to the lighthouse and its routines. Thomas was obedient sometimes, but mostly mischievous. He had learned the patterns of the town below, the gulls and the gulls' cries, the way fog rolled in and swallowed the cobblestones. And he had discovered the foghorn. It was a great brass instrument, bell-mouthed and terrible, designed to warn sailors when the cliffs came crawling out of the mist. Thomas had found that pressing its lever could make the villagers come running to the shore, hearts in their throats, eyes wide with greed and fear. At first, it had been thrilling. One night, he blew the horn for the first time, laughing as the villagers scuttled out in their coats, expecting wreckage, expecting salvage. They cursed when there was nothing. He laughed harder. Another night, another blast, and another. Soon, the shore below had grown empty on foggy evenings. The villagers had begun to ignore the horn altogether. Some muttered about Thomas's pranks, calling him a little devil. Some threatened him and his father. But mostly, they stayed in their houses, windows shuttered, muttering about luckless nights and wasted effort. Thomas didn't care, even when the other kids stopped playing with him. He liked being alone in the tower, the fog curling around the lantern room, the sea a dark, endless mirror below. He would press his ear to the brass of the horn and imagine distant ships rocking in storms, skeleton crews cursing their fates, waves smashing their hulls against the cliffs. He liked imagining the lives he could save if anyone ever listened. Thomas, his father said one evening, as he tightened the bolts on the lamp's gears, the sea doesn't like liars. It remembers every false call. Thomas grinned, holding back a laugh. The sea won't mind if I just practice. You're too young to understand. This is harming the village. His father muttered, not looking at him. His hands smelled of salt and iron, and he smelled like it too, like a man carved from seawater and loneliness. When the real danger comes, the horn will scream, and no one will answer. Thomas nodded, but didn't take the warning seriously. The sea, after all, was just water and fog. Danger belonged to other people, on other cliffs, in other towns. Then came the night of the green lanterns. Thomas had been peering out into the fog, the cliffs dissolving into gray, when he saw them. small points of light bobbing in the mist, faint and impossible. His chest tightened. He pressed the lever of the horn in panic, not thinking of the villagers, scowls, or curses. Nothing. No clamor, no boots on cobbles, no lights in the windows. Just fog curling and curling. And then the shapes rose. They were ships at first, but wrong. Galleons, enormous and grotesque, hulls cracked and rotting, masts splintered and covered in barnacles. No sails, only the skeletal remnants of cloth, dripping brine. A cold wind hissed through the rigging, carrying a sound like drowned men coughing up seaweed. Thomas stumbled back, clutching the railing of the lighthouse. And then the crew came, the invasion. They were gray as driftwood, skin hanging loose, eyes hollow, glowing faintly, as if lanterns burned behind their sockets. Water poured from their mouths and hair like seaweed clung to their faces. Chains dripped with brine and fire. Where they stepped, the sand sizzled and smoked, a brackish black flame that consumed wood, rope, and flesh alike. They came ashore silently, dragging their dead weight over the sand, and Thomas realized with a horror that he had never imagined. The villagers would not come. They had mocked his cries too long. They would not answer now. He ran down the spiral stairs, calling out, "Father, Father, look, the ships." The keeper met him at the bottom, harpoon in hand, eyes wide but steady. "Get back in the tower, boy," he commanded. But Thomas clutched his father's sleeve. "They're real. They're coming. We have to warn them. By the time you get there, there will be no one left to warn," his father said, voice low, grim. "I told you, boy. The sea remembers." Outside, the drowned sailors stepped into the village. They dragged screaming townsfolk into the waves, the fire blooming from their boots, licking at the wooden cottages. Windows shattered, thatched roofs caught in the cold, wet flames. Thomas and his father watched as the villagers were swallowed, screaming and clawing at sand and water alike. One by one, the houses ignited, a lattice of orange and greenish flames, the wind carrying the smoke up to the cliffs where the lighthouse stood white and silent. Thomas wanted to scream for mercy, for someone to come, for the horn to work. But he found his voice lost in the tidal roar of the waves and the crackling fire. His father's hands trembled on the harpoon, but the sea claimed him swiftly, dragging him into the cold gray surf, chains clanging against rock. Thomas stumbled back into the tower, slamming the door. The foghorn groaned at his touch, but it made no sound beyond the tower's walls. Only the waves answered. Hours passed. He could hear the echoes of his own footsteps, the crackle of burning houses, and sometimes, faintly, the laughter. The laughter of the drowned, yes, but also his own, twisted and ringing across the cliffs. When dawn came, the fog lifted. Thomas climbed to the lantern room, the city of smoke and ash below him. Nothing remained of the village but charred beams and smoldering sand. The lighthouse stood untouched, its white tower gleaming coldly in the new light as though mocking him. The horn sat silent, brass gleaming like a warning he could never send. The sea rolled in indifferent waves, washing away footprints, dragging away the echoes of screams. And sometimes, just sometimes, Thomas could hear it again. A child's laughter rising from the waves, soft and terrible, carrying with it the weight of all that had been lost. He pressed his hands to the railing, gazing at the gray water. He knew now that his father had been right. The sea did remember, and the sea would always remember. Moral of the story: a lesson in lying mock disaster too long, and disaster mocks you in return.